The coronavirus is getting bad in places like Italy, Spain, and the United States. But is there really a massive cover-up happening in China? And should we adopt China's authoritarianism to fight the coronavirus? Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. The coronavirus, or the Ccp virus as I'm calling it, because the Chinese Communist Party's cover-up is what allowed it to spread back in December and January. And we all know about the cover-up and the lies the Communist Party told back then, which is why they're trying to do everything they can to deflect coronavirus blame, like by claiming the US military brought the coronavirus to Wuhan, and using a massive propaganda push to make themselves look like the hero that's saving the world. So given their history of lies and propaganda about the coronavirus outbreak, would it really surprise you to learn that the Communist Party is still lying and covering things up now? After all, the Communist Party needs to maintain their narrative of being the world's hero. So as the Ccp virus spreads around the world with thousands of deaths across Italy, Spain, and the United States, you should really question whether the Chinese Communist Party is telling the truth when they say everything's fine inside China. Even Wuhan, where the Ccp virus started, supposedly has no new cases, thanks to the success of strict measures. They're lying. And it turns out anyone who can do basic math can figure out that they're lying. The official data from the Chinese government claims that about 3,300 people have died in China from the coronavirus since the outbreak began in December. That's the number for the entire country. But the word from people inside China tells a different story. A recent article in Ccp magazine included an interview with a truck driver in the city of Wuhan on March 26th. The driver said that he had loaded up 2,500 ash-filled urns and delivered them to a funeral home in Hankou district, and that he did the same number the day before. So that's 5,000 urns in 2 days from one funeral home, in one city, in a country that claims only 3,300 people have died from the coronavirus in the past 3 months. Now sure, some of those urns could represent natural deaths. According to data from provincial authorities in 2018, an average of 131 people die each day in Wuhan. Let's round up to 200 because hey, maybe there was a particularly deadly truck pileup on the busy streets of Wuhan. We're still talking about more urns on this truck in 2 days than the official coronavirus death toll in all of China in 3 months. This is a lot of dead people. Yes, each cardboard box is one urn. And according to Ccp, there are 3,500 urns in this photo. I've given just one example from one funeral home, so I hope by this point you're thinking, something fishy is going on. What's the real death toll from the Ccp virus across China? Well, probably nobody knows the exact number, because there are lots of great ways to cover up the death toll, and some of them work so well that officials can no longer keep track even if they wanted to. One way to cover up the death toll is force people to stay in their homes. Don't actually test them. If they die, they were never tested for the Ccp virus, so they don't count in the official statistics. Back in January and February, reporters inside China had documented multiple cases of this exact thing happening. Patients died of the coronavirus, but they were never officially tested. A second way to cover up the death toll is, if someone dies of complications from the Ccp virus or had an underlying condition, doctors are encouraged to write that as the cause of death. Like it'll say severe pneumonia or heart disease instead of the coronavirus. This also doesn't get counted in the official statistics. For a long time, China has done this with flu deaths too. That's one reason that China reports extremely low numbers of deaths from the flu, only dozens of cases a year. By contrast, the US government uses statistical modeling to estimate the number of influenza-associated deaths in America each year, which is usually in the tens of thousands. This is why I say, don't trust official Chinese government statistics. There are so many ways to manipulate them. A third way to cover up the CCP virus death toll is blatant censorship. China's most popular social media app, WeChat, has been censoring user-posted content related to the coronavirus since January. A fourth way is authoritarian pressure. The official party line since mid-March has been that the spread of the virus has been basically curbed in Hubei province and the city of Wuhan, the original epicenter. So imagine you're a local official in Wuhan, and you see that people in your district are continuing to die from the coronavirus at an alarming rate. Or even worse, it looked like things were getting better, but now they're getting bad again. You can either A, tell the higher-ups that a lot more people are dying and dear leader Xi Jinping's official narrative is wrong, or B, keep your fool mouth shut and sweep the ashes under the rug. I think they're all choosing option B, so they can keep their jobs and their lives. This is the reality of being a local official in an authoritarian regime. You're forced to toe the party line. It's like the 1986 Chernobyl accident in the Soviet Union. Watch that show Chernobyl on HBO, and you'll see how everyone's first response is to downplay how bad things are because they don't want to get in trouble. Nuclear meltdown is not possible. It's just small fire. So for all these reasons, we know there's a cover-up of the death toll from the CCP virus in China. How many people have really died? Let's look at some estimates. I've seen reports that China has lost 21 million mobile phone subscribers in the past 3 months, and maybe this means they're all dead. That's probably not what's happening. According to official data, the number of mobile phone lines dropped from 1.6 billion to 1.579 billion. Going from 1.6 billion down to 1.579, that's about 21 million fewer phone lines. But even 1.579 billion is vastly more phone lines than people in China, including babies. Which is to say, a lot of people have more than one mobile phone, or more than one SIM card in each phone. Dual SIM phones are pretty common in China, and at a time of economic crunch, it makes sense to cancel extra lines. Like, you had to close your small business? Cancel that extra line. You and your wife are quarantined in Wuhan, and you can't travel to Shanghai to see your mistress. Cancel her extra line. If 21 million people had died from the CCP virus, that's probably too many people to cover up. But the Chinese regime could easily be covering up a death toll that's in the tens of thousands, still much bigger than the official death toll of 3,300. That seems to be what's happening. This article in the UK's Daily Mail says scientific advisors told Prime Minister Boris Johnson that the number of cases of coronavirus in China could be downplayed by a factor of 15 to 40 times. Now, I'm not saying the Daily Mail is the most trustworthy source of news, but they're not the only ones making this claim. And a factor of 15 to 40 times sounds about right based on, again, some simple math. This Radio Free Asia article looks at a few different estimates for the death toll. It says some social media posts have estimated that all 7 funeral homes in Wuhan are handing out 3,500 urns every day in total. And they're trying to complete this before April 5th. That's China's Qingming festival, the annual holiday where you're supposed to go to your ancestors' grave, or the place where their ashes are stored, and burn incense. Or burn money, so your ancestors can get rich in the afterlife. Anyway, the article says funeral homes in Wuhan have been handing out 3,500 urns every day starting March 23rd, which is 12 days before the Qingming festival begins. Such an estimate would mean that 42,000 urns would be given out during that time. In a normal year, about 10,000 people would die in Wuhan from January through mid-March. Even so, we're talking about roughly 32,000 unexplained deaths. That's a lot of extra urns full of ashes. Another estimate looks at the cremation activity of funeral homes in Wuhan. people in Wuhan have reported that funeral homes have been cremating bodies non-stop 24 hours a day. With a total of 84 furnaces running at max capacity, this calculation results in an estimated 46,800 deaths. One Wuhan resident told RFA that city officials have been handing out hush money to families in exchange for their silence about how their loved ones died. All this is to say, Chinese officials are covering up a massive coronavirus death toll in Wuhan. And if they're doing it there, they're probably covering it up in other parts of China too, although Wuhan was the hardest hit area. That makes the estimate given to Prime Minister Boris Johnson seem plausible, that the real death toll in China is 15 to 40 times higher than reported. Incidentally, Boris Johnson himself has tested positive for the coronavirus after visiting a hospital and shaking hands with everybody. But my point is, when Western media report that Italy's death toll overtakes China's, or that Spain's death toll surpasses China's, that is really sloppy reporting, because they're comparing death tolls reported by transparent Western governments with death tolls reported by a brutal authoritarian regime that for sure covered things up back in January and is almost certainly still covering up things now. And that's a big deal, because the Chinese regime is in an all-out propaganda push, saying other countries should use China's model for fighting the coronavirus. Hopefully people reading those misleading articles won't fall for it. So when Western media ask, can China's coronavirus strategy work elsewhere? The answer should be no, because it hasn't even worked in China. And coming up after the break, we'll look more at China's strategy for battling the coronavirus. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. The deadly coronavirus pandemic continues to spread around the world, or as I'm calling it, the Ccp Coronavirus, or Ccp Virus for short, because the Chinese Communist Party's cover-up is what allowed it to spread around the world. Globally, more than 500,000 people have been infected and at least 20,000 people have died. I know this is a scary time, but please don't panic. There are a few simple things that you can do to keep yourself and your family safe. The best way to defend yourself from the coronavirus is to wash your hands frequently for 20 seconds. Practice social distancing, and most importantly, implement brutal authoritarian rule. That's right, your pathetic freedoms and liberty will be your downfall. There's a message being pushed that China's authoritarian response to the coronavirus works, and Western democracies just can't handle it. Or as the New York Times put it, that's just the price of an open society. This narrative obviously ignores the fact that the coronavirus became a pandemic because the Chinese Communist Party covered it up and allowed it to spread around the world. #CCP Virus. And it also ignores the fact that Taiwan, a free and open society run by Chinese people, has done a better job than any other country at fighting the Ccp virus. But please, ignore those facts. The good news is not everyone believes the CCP's lies. In this case, Vox gets it. But a huge number of people are still being fooled. Some people are even suggesting that since the West is so bad at handling the coronavirus, it's time to shelter in China. To clarify, this article is not suggesting you physically go and shelter in China, which you can't do anyway since they've closed the border to all foreigners. No, it's suggesting you shelter your money in China, specifically buy Chinese government bonds. Don't do that. I can only assume that the writer of that article has been reading too much Chinese state-run media. See, according to my favorite Chinese state-run media, the Global Times, we need to learn from China. So, let's take a look at what the People's Republic of China did to deal with the coronavirus, starting with how Chinese officials rounded people up and threw them into mass quarantine camps. And if people went outside without a mask, they did this, and this, and this. This guy didn't wear a mask, so they tied him to a pillar, still without a mask. These ethnic Uyghurs weren't supposed to go outside, so officials hung signs from their necks calling them dogs, which is so wrong. I mean, if they were dogs, they'd be allowed to go outside. Other Chinese officials thought that it would be a good idea to weld potentially infected families into their homes. And of course, who could forget the good old rounding up people on the streets and shoving them into boxes? That makes being forced to the ground and sprayed with disinfectant seem less bad. Okay, that's all horrible, but it worked, right? Wrong. And not just because you can't cure the coronavirus by beating it out of someone. It's also because the Communist Party has lied all along about how many coronavirus cases China has. Just 2.5 months ago, they were clearly lying about the coronavirus, even claiming it couldn't spread human to human. Why would anyone think that the Chinese Communist Party is telling the truth now about how many people have the coronavirus? More people have died from the Ccp virus in Italy than China? Come on, BBC, no. That is so stupid. Why would you believe China's official data? China has a lot more cases that are not being reported. And on top of that, we're about to see a second wave of infections in China. I did a whole episode about that. Now, I can understand why Chinese state-run media have praised how China responded to the coronavirus. I can even understand why the horribly corrupt World Health Organization has praised China's response.
If I had COVID-19, I want to be treated in China.
That's nuts. Unless he likes being held down. But more likely, it's because the WHO is horribly corrupt. Mr. I like it when cops sit on me also said hundreds of thousands of people in China did not get COVID-19 because of this aggressive response. Don't worry, the WHO is basing that on data provided by Chinese scientists. And those scientists could be lying or providing false data given to them by people who are lying. Here in the West, the media usually love to accuse people in power of lying. But somehow, they're not picking up on it when the Chinese regime is lying. Or they're just being stupid. Like this Bloomberg headline. Coronavirus is making China's model look better and better. That headline was eventually changed, but only slightly. And here's Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press, who apparently does not know what a leading question is.
How uncomfortable is it that perhaps China's authoritarian ways did prevent this? Meaning, had China been a free and open society, this might have spread faster?
You know, in the beginning, Chuck, they were not as transparent as we would have liked.
But their extreme quarantines, has that worked?
Well, you know, it has. I mean, that's not the usual thing you do. Their efforts have been draconian, something we never would be able to do here. But even though there's a lot of things that have unintended negative consequences of that, I think it did help dampen what would have been a broader Chinese. Wuhan was terrible, but I think they prevented a broader spread.
And Mother Jones reminds us that was because China was able to build hospitals very quickly, one of many lessons we can learn from China. In Wuhan alone, Chinese workers constructed, from scratch, 2 new facilities to hold an additional 2,600 hospital beds in a matter of days. I mean, yes, technically you can't build a hospital in a few days, and those are really just glorified quarantine centers, or you can turn a hotel into a quarantine center until it collapses. But details. Overall, it was an enormous success, according to an expert from the New York Times on The Rachel Maddow Show.
China has had enormous success in beating down its epidemic. We see the drone shots from these cities and we think, ooh, lockdown, it looks terrible, there's no traffic on the street. That's not the point of what they did. They had to do that in order to introduce the measures they were going to take that were actually going to fight the epidemic. And that is testing, 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 testing. If you go into any building, your temperature is taken. I came into this building, nobody took my temperature. So people were literally quickly taken away from their families to these giant gymnasiums or stadiums where they were not concentration camps. They were beds, there, and they even had dance classes in these things. It's not a bad policy.
Not a bad policy at all. So I know what you're thinking. How soon can the rest of us have China's successful model for battling the coronavirus? Soon. Newswire service AFP is suggesting that China's model should be used for the rest of the world. And you know how the Chinese regime has been developing a surveillance state using social media apps like WeChat? We should have that too. Because apps like WeChat have helped enforce the restrictions because they allow the government to keep track of people's movements and even stop people with confirmed infections from traveling. And WeChat has even stopped people from doing really dangerous things like talking openly with each other. I know, China's authoritarian model sounds great, but there's one thing we need to watch out for: authoritarianism. At least when it comes to President Trump. Yes, the same media organizations that are praising China and begging for Chinese authoritarianism to come to the United States are also warning that Trump will use the coronavirus as an excuse to bring authoritarianism to the United States. Look, the liberty we enjoy in the United States was hard-won. Brave men and women gave their lives for the freedoms we now take for granted. There will always be some threat to the country, whether it's terrorism or a pandemic. But should we really throw all that away for a little bit of security? Absolutely. Which is why I'm proud to announce my campaign for Supreme Leader of these United States for life. Trust me, you're gonna love it. And that's it for today's China Uncensored. I'm your future Supreme Leader, Chris Chappell. See you at the polls.
Viewers have described China Uncensored like The Daily Show, but about China.
In China, something can be illegal, but still in common practice. For example, bribery, or intellectual property theft, or Uber. But you know, there's a common Chinese saying, "La schmaz." What's that, Shelley? Oh, okay. I'm being told no Chinese people ever say that.
At the beginning, I was super excited when I got 500 views on an episode, and now the show's grown to about 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. One episode reached 7.9 million people and counting.
Ride in luxury to your destination in only double the amount of time it would take you to fly there. Dreams come true. And China is the little engine that could.
I'm a little freaked out that that many people have seen my face.
It's kind of ironic that I'm the minority in a show about China. People in the comments, they'll be like, "You're a traitor." I'm being a patriot. This is my way of showing that I love the country that I came from.
Matt, Shelley, and I went to the Philippines to disputed waters, the Scarborough Shoal.
China and the Philippines claim the Scarborough Shoal. The Chinese military is asserting its claims in the South China Sea, so there's a dispute.
We had to take a rickety little Filipino fishing boat surrounded by threatening Chinese Coast Guard vessels.
Chris planted the China Uncensored flag, and then we got away with it. Chris, Shelley, our cameraman, and I went to the Waldorf Astoria in New York, hoping to interview the leader of China, Xi Jinping.
Oh, we are being helped. Going to...
What is it? China Uncensored?
China Uncensored, yeah.
I don't suppose there's a chance I could use it.
Down the staircase.
No, all right.
The lead security guard followed us out and said we were banned for life from the Waldorf Astoria.
Chris Chappell here right outside of Mongkok. Our camera guy is in there right now. He's seen people getting beat by police. Police are trying to tear down the tents. Things are wild now.
People would say things to us like, "My professor plays China Uncensored for our class." To see people really believe in what we were talking about was life-changing for all of us.
One word you would use to describe Chris Chappell.
Committed.
Hilarious.
engaging, intriguing.
Have you heard of China Uncensored? Great comedy show. Hey, have you heard of China Uncensored? It's starring me.
It's more and more obvious that China is having a major influence on the U.S.
The way that the US is treating China now, it will start to affect people's lives, and they'll need somewhere to go to learn about that.
Hey, have you heard of China Uncensored? 中国解密.
In 5 years, I see China Uncensored as the only show available on TV or the internet. It will be the sole source of edutainment worldwide.
Have you heard of China Uncensored?
I have.
You actually have? He's heard of China Uncensored.
I love China Uncensored.